All righty. Hello, everybody. Chris Flick here. This is Chris Flick podcast episode number 136. Today I have a guest here. He's an old friend, a guy that I grew up with. His name's Matthew Gorkos. He's a pastor. So Matt, how you doing?
Doing all right, Chris. It's good to
So I,
be
j-
here.
I just read your I just finished reading your book, The Story Church, which was good and it was very interesting. And there's a lot going on in this book. Now, I guess to give a background a little bit on it, I think we grew up in the same town. We played the same sports primarily growing up. Got into coaching then. I think we crossed paths a few times here and there when you were coaching wrestling and all that. So, um, I'm just trying to highlight some local people. There's a lot of good, interesting people out there, and I want to try to have some of these conversations that are kind of hard to come by. Some conversations on trying to find meaning, trying to find purpose, and all that stuff. So I thought you'd be a great guy to have on. So
That's awesome. I appreciate it.
yeah, so getting into this stuff here now. I mean, just in terms of becoming a pastor and all that, this path that you went on, like at what age, at what point in your life were you like, this is kind of what I want to do?
Yeah, so I grew up going to church. My parents took me to church all the time. They still attend the church that I grew up in, and so it was always something that was, part of my life. And growing up, I was involved in a lot of things that were happening at the church. Not always by choice. I got, signed up for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, but pretty much, once I got to high school, something shifted for me, and it went from being something that I was, doing unwillingly to something that I was starting to say, you know what, I kind of like this. This is interesting. This is meaningful to me being part of this, and getting a chance to participate in things at the church and in different ways, and the affirmation of the church community. It was a big part of it, and having people say, you know what, you're good at this, and then getting to lead a help lead a student led Bible study at the high school. Probably, so it was probably around like my sophomore junior year of high school where I said, you know what, I like doing this. I'm interested in this. People tell me I'm good at it. Maybe this is what I should be doing with my life. And so that was probably around the time where I sensed, this is the path that I want to keep going down towards, becoming a pastor. And so and then it's, from there, it's taken on different iterations and trying to figure out what exactly, what kind of a pastor I was going to be or what kind of ministry work I was going to do. But really from that point on, I knew this is, where my heart was, and where my passions were, trying to do something for the church.
And then after high school, I mean, you said you had the Bible study and all that. You went to Messiah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
what is that major? What is that degree? What did you study there?
Yeah, so my undergrad degree was in Christian ministries, and going to Messiah was, one of those decisions where being able to focus on that as a degree was one selling point, but also being able to continue to be a two sport athlete at the college level was another big piece of it. That was another big a big draw to a college like that was not only being able to focus on the kind of degree that I wanted, but to be able to, keep playing sports because those were always a big part of my life growing up too. Like you said, we played lots of sports together growing up.
Yes.
There was never an off season. It was just you moved to a different sport.
Yeah. And then what do you think about, there's these things that I don't know, I guess I get your thoughts on this. It's like there's always something with like the people that you grow up with where it's like you don't really need to see them. You just kind of almost catch back up sometimes on wherever things left off. But like there's certain the bonds, there's certain connections and stuff that you get from athletics. Um, in your book, you talk about trying to create that third place, and I think for a lot of kids, that third place would be well, what would be the first two places, I guess, in somebody's life? How would you define, the two main focus points in
Well,
somebody's life?
yeah, so that third place, in the book that it comes from, the Ray Oldenburg book, is who sort of I first heard that idea from. But the two places that he sets as sort of those of one and two are the workplace and the home.
Right.
Those are the two that he sets up and says that we spend most of our lives, either at work, which I would say school counts for that too, as far as the life of a
Yeah.
student. It's you got that school, but then home, and he says there's so much isolation. Like those workplace bonds aren't always real personal bonds, or meaningful bonds. It's sort of the motion, the things you do because you have to, and then you get home and it's sort of you're isolated from the rest of the world in a lot of ways. And he envisions this third place because he sees a world in which basically there is no in between. You're either at work or you're at home and you're separate from everybody else. And he talks about the loss of the front porch in the American neighborhood, and how, back in the day, and you and I grew up in this situation where, in the summertime especially, you could get a whole neighborhood of kids together playing kickball at somebody's house or at the park, and you just kind of went out, and the neighborhood was one big third place, because everybody went outside and all the kids got together. And he sort of talks about how that sense of neighborhoodness, of everybody being together, is we're losing that. And he says, and that is causing us to, we don't have the same depth of relationships with one another in community. And so his third place idea is really trying to bridge that gap that's taking place in society. And so he, tries to talk about what are other places where authentic relationships can be built, where there is not the pressure of needing there to be sort of an agenda or productivity like it is at work, but also where you're forming bonds with people outside of your family group, outside of your usual sort of network. And that's, and I think you're right. I think athletics is one of the places that can happen. I think that's, and I've talked to people in the church already who, I hear the lament all the time of, we don't see young families at church because there's all these youth sports going on Sunday mornings. And I say, okay, but there's a kind of community and a kind of belonging that is happening at those youth sports that people weren't getting from church. And so it's there's a need being met, in those youth sports that the church wasn't meeting, and that's why people are there. And I think it is that third place sentiment that's, that is part of that.
And when you talked about, well, I think, those bonds that you talked about, creating strong bonds in that third place, right? So like what I was, me and you grew up doing the same stuff. So you build these strong bonds through sport. Whereas you could run into somebody 10, 15 years down the line and you'll still have some sort of like, fondness and memories and things to talk about. There's like certain things that are built there. I think as you progress through life, then at one point in time, church would occupy that third place, right? For a
Yeah.
lot of people. And then something happened where I think this is where your book kind of wants to tackle that problem of, um, where did the church, like, where did they go wrong? Where did they lose that ability to draw people in as the place to be for their third place, and maybe provide some value that might overshadow or out, perform what they got from the youth sport world as a parent or something. So I mean, that's to me, this stuff, this stuff kind of shows up too with like coaching, business, and
Mhm.
all that stuff. Where it's like if you don't provide the value for somebody, they'll just go somewhere else, you know.
Mhm.
And it's almost like just taking ownership in what you do, and everything kind of comes back to you, and trying to find ways, trying to problem solve. What are the problems, and move forward, trying to fix that, right? I mean, is that kind of where you are in terms of your journey? Like, what did you see at some previous churches? You talk about a previous church that you worked at, some things that were going on there. What led you on this path? The book that you wrote is about using story to kind of make connection, right?
Yeah.
And it's like no matter what product you're selling, if you can't connect with the audience, it's not going to work,
Yeah.
right? Um, so the role of story, I think, is probably the most prominent role in like education, learning, and all that stuff. Like, any, yeah, you're a parent, and you use stories of the past to try to like build the future, right? So, what led you down this line? When you came out of college, were you following the typical model that like a pastor might follow in terms of how they were speaking to their members in the congregation, or did you just kind of see something was flawed in your mind right away and try to do something different?
Well, I mean, so even when I was in undergrad, I had a sense of, that the church was already facing sort of this crisis of the way that we've done things for so long is not working the way that it used to, and that there was a shift in the approach and the focus and sort of the whole church mentality. And I think that's sort of what you touched on there, that it's, you know, the church was a third place for the longest time. I think in you know, in the book I talk about this sort of village, you know,
Yeah.
that village church model, and you know, the church was the community's third place. It was the place where, you know, people came to hang out and to network and to meet each other. And I think that what happened to the church is what happens to a lot of us, which is we get comfortable in the routine. We get comfortable in, you know, oh, well, this is working, and so we're just going to keep doing this because it's working, and then suddenly it's not working anymore, and it's because we just settled in and got
That
complacent.
that happens in sports, right? I
No,
mean,
that
you see
happens.
the
Yeah,
coach the NFL, the guy that's been there for 12 years, eventually his messaging gets a little stale.
yeah,
He's not reaching the players or the fans or whoever the same way that he used to.
yeah,
You get complacent a little bit. You feel like, I think you talked in the book about, say the regeneration was just occurring naturally, but then all of a sudden, the regeneration of membership just kind of slowed.
yeah,
I get that in my line of work too. It's like if I'm not proactive and actually planning things, people just aren't going to come. But if all I do is put a schedule out and make sure you send an email or two out, try to stay in touch with people, try to provide a good service, people are going to walk in the door.
mhm.
Um, Now with your stuff here, I forgot to mention, now your book had two things in there that I really enjoy: Rage Against the Machine and George Orwell. How many? I forgot to ask you this. How many pastors are out there listening to Rage Against the Machine right now? Do you think?
I don't. I
Are you in the
I mean,
minority?
huh?
Are you in the minority there?
I would guess so.
Yeah,
I came to Rage Against the Machine late in life, I would say.
yeah, it's great
But
stuff.
I,
I
you
get
know
it.
what? But what's funny is I can't. It's crazy talking to you about this because my first memories of Rage Against the Machine are your brother playing it for our you know, walk our running out music for wrestling.
Yeah,
Um,
there's probably an
that
expletive or two in there.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
oh yeah, for
hopefully
sure.
you got the clean version out.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that's my first memory of them. But
Yeah,
they're not a band that I came to appreciate until, you know, much later in life. And I think it's, you know, for me it's just I use that word resonance. There's a resonance in the 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 feeling and emotion and stuff that they have in their music to, you know, it taps into to the way that the world makes me feel at times right now.
yeah,
um
and it's
and
it's they're not bashful. Like, this is stuff I think we're going to talk to. They,
yeah,
whether or not you agree with whatever they're saying, they will take a stand. I mean, they're still doing it now. They're out touring right now,
oh
and I
yeah,
saw they're trying to get people. They're doing what they did in the '90s and early
yep,
2000s. They're trying to, somebody's wrongfully imprisoned. They're trying to raise money for the hungry. A
yep,
lot of their proceeds are going to those causes, and they might do it by controversial measures sometimes, but they're still trying to. They have courage, number one, and then they're not afraid to voice what they have to say and to do what they feel is right. And I
yeah,
think that's kind of something that is not common. You
yeah,
know, it's
yeah.
not common in the average person. So maybe I kind of I admire their courage, maybe because I'm lacking it sometimes. But they've got a voice and they're not afraid to be the voice for the voiceless sometimes, which is nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, they were just performing in New York City, and I was trying to go, but we went on vacation. They were touring Madison Square Garden. Anyway, not to get too
No, no,
sidetracked.
yeah, no.
That Do you read George Orwell, by the way?
Huh?
Yeah, are you a fan of George Orwell's writing at all?
Some, no, it's, but you know, it's another one where it's like, you know, I think there's a lot of power in, you know, the dystopian genre.
Yeah,
um you know, it's always amazing to see the folks who are able to imagine the stories of where might all this be going, and how scary it is when they, you know, when there's things that show up now as you read it, you know, years and years and years ago, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, did they know? How did they know? You know, it's I remember I did a book study near the beginning of COVID here, where we met on Zoom and we read through Camus' The Plague. um,
yeah,
and that was just like mind blowing to see, you know, this guy imagining, you know, a pandemic kind of situation, and seeing how, you know, all of the reactions of the characters pretty much matched the different reactions that we were seeing from people in our society.
I guess
And it was just,
humans are humans, right?
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. And then, one of the other ones that I read recently, or listened to, I should say, listened to an audio version of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, which, if you haven't read it, is just another crazy story set in, she wrote it in the 90s, but it's set in like the mid 2020s, and depicts our country with climate change having wreaked sort of economic havoc and environmental havoc, and sort of what society looks like beyond that. And it's another one that's just like, how did she know? How did she know in the 90s that this is really what the world is going to look like?
yeah.
And it's just those kind of things are, it's a fun genre to look at, but it's scary sometimes.
And well, yeah, but I think, you read Orwell's Animal Farm or something like that, and it shows you the power of a story and how it could resonate and how it could last. I mean, who's gonna think like I'm gonna read, like if somebody told me this, there's a book about authoritarian governments that involves pigs and farm animals. Like, are you gonna read that? No, but he wrote it in a way. He just laid it out perfectly, and I think it kind of could hit from the 15-year-old in high school who might think it's kind of stupid, might not appreciate it as much, but they could still kind of get the gist and get the idea. And if you revisit that book later in life, it's like, wow, this thing's incredible. Like, oh, I've read it twice probably in the last 5 years, and I'll probably read it again, which is the power of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, now we talked. That's what I wanted to kind of bring in full circle with that, with the rage thing and that, and speaking out in your church here. You used in your book too. You talked about people being comfortable. Trying to create that third place, that place where people can become um, feel safe, right?
Mhm.
Like you want your people to not feel ashamed for things that they did, and maybe be open about it in terms of healing. And you used Alcoholics
Mhm.
Anonymous in your book as a great example of some of the things that they do. And I didn't know a lot. I thought I might have, like, anyway, I don't know what they did, honestly. I've never been to one of their meetings, never even read about it, but they have like this system in play that seems to really work towards people dealing with recovery. And is there a few of those ideas that you absolutely use, or like what do you think is the best? Um, what did you steal from them, I guess, in terms of how they heal and how they help people recover and feel better about what they're doing in their lives?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that initially drew me to the AA sort of model of the way they do things is just in the sense of that story really is the unifying force of not only their gatherings, but basically their scripture in that sense is really an account of recovery. It's people's stories. That is and that is their evangelism. The way that they reach other people is to tell their stories of recovery. And so it's, everything that they're doing is rooted in, here's my story, and here's what I've been through, and here's where I'm trying to go, and here's who I'm trying, the person that I'm trying to be, and that story of transformation and recovery. And I think it's, in what I think is powerful, and the reason that I latched on to AA as a model of the kind of community that I think churches should be trying to be, is because churches, and this I think goes back to what you were asking, like where did churches go wrong? And I think part of the issue is churches somehow bought into this mindset um, of needing to appear perfect and pure and righteous, and this sense of everybody who's here has their life together, and and everybody's good, nobody has any problems. um, and I think everybody who sits in the pews knows in their hearts that that is not true. Like, and yet we all sort of put on this facade of having everything together, and so we can't ever talk about the things that are bothering us, or the things that are wrong, or the problems we might have, and how to get help, and how to find healing, and how to change. And change is such a central part of what the gospel is. It's the promise that you can change, and that there is hope for you, and that the problems aren't going to be with you forever. And like, I just don't, we sell short what the gospel message is when we come to church and assume that none of us need to change. that we're already all good.
Yeah, that's
And I
bad.
think, that AA model begins with the admitting, yep, nope, I'm not perfect and I need to change, and yet there's hope for me. And
Yeah,
that's it's just I think so much of my heart for what I hope for the churches is being able to recover that sense of honesty and authenticity. And I think that's the thing, that when people stopped seeing that the church was honest and authentic about itself and about just the human condition, and people, nobody being perfect. As soon as the church started pretending we were all perfect, I think people stopped seeing it as a place where they could be authentic and be themselves.
yeah. Now, you brought up a few things there. That the first would be you shared that Kierkegaard quote where the opposite of being in despair is believing. I think at AA provides, you know, belief from other people, and they want people to find that within themselves, right? To believe in, a greater good or something like that, so they could get out of that funk, that hole that they're in, whether it's like a mental health thing or like an addictive issues, say with addiction. I don't know. They all, in my opinion, they're in a certain level of despair, right? I mean, you don't really see a lot of people that feel great about themselves if they are doing actions and behaviors that they're not happy or proud of. Um, and I think I shared with you before that book when I asked you if you ever read Tolstoy's Confessions. He was the most prolific writer of his time, and yet he was scared to go in the woods with a gun because he thought he might take his life. He didn't want to go into his bedroom with a rope. He thought he would hang himself. you know, the most prolific guy. He had it all, family and all that stuff. He was still missing something. He was still missing something to believe in. And he ended up finding it. He found it in church. He found it in some of the teachings that were given. He didn't literally believe he was consuming the body of Christ so there were some things that he couldn't get his rational mind around, but he still found something in going to church. And I think people find that in AA. They find that in other like community, the third place type things, right? Um, but that was one part of it all, right? I mean, is that your goal then as a pastor is to find to like everybody that comes into your church, not that they're not going to be this virtuous, non-sinning individual. It's like you meet them where they are, you let them know that you also been down the road. Everybody has committed some sort of sin, I think, at some point in their life. And just to not lose hope, is that what you want for everybody that comes in there? Just to know, like, we're here, we've been down that road, and we got your back, and you could share with us, like, your goal as a pastor, like, if somebody would have just asked you that, like, what is your goal for the people that you work with? Like, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental longing of every human person is to know that um, their life has purpose and meaning, and that they belong and are loved. Um, and I think my goal as a pastor is to affirm that whoever comes to my church is somebody whose life is valuable, and is worthy of dignity and love, and to try to form a community in which everybody who walks through our doors has that sense of acceptance and welcome and validation. Because I think that's one of the things that people crave, and people they will seek that out and find that kind of affirmation wherever they can get it. And if it's
That's
not church, then it's going to be somewhere else. And so I think we're trying to be a community in which that's one of the needs that are met. And then the other part is, and this goes back to even that Kierkegaard quote. And because Kierkegaard was somebody who struggled with, what is the purpose of life? What does my life mean when I am just a little blip on the on
Yeah,
the on
seriously.
the timeline of history, right? Like, I am
That's
a
that's an
nothing. And
honest question.
yeah.
No,
And I think, but he found that answer in the faith that, I'm still somebody who's been created in the image of God, and am part of this huge story of history that God is working out. And I have a small part in that, and that part matters.
yeah,
And I think to let people know that even though life can feel small, that's not a reason for despair. It's a reason to hone in on, and yet in spite of how small it is, your life matters to God. And that's an affirming thing too. And so just trying to, a lot of it is just letting people know that they matter and are, are important to the community and to God.
And we talked. You mentioned how people could find um, that sense of belonging in the wrong thing sometimes
Oh
too,
yeah.
right? And I think I don't know what I was listening to, but the guy started, breaking down his assessment on things, and I think he said that something like Twitter, right? The new atheism movement, like those CrossFit for some people, they
Hmm.
provide. Well, CrossFit's not a negative thing, we'll say, but like, Twitter might provide that. There's rules and regulations that you have to follow. They create a framework for how you could get punished. If you take down the tweet that got you in trouble, you could be kind of redeemed and back on there. If I was comparing that to like what maybe religion offered, 100 years ago, a certain framework that they could operate from. And I think social media might provide that. You get that feeling of community, family, but it seems
Oh,
to
and
me that it's not.
validation for sure.
Yeah, and it's not authentic.
Yeah.
Well, potentially inauthentic relationships. Nothing. There's like a certain mask. I think Carl Jung was like persona. It's like a
Hmm.
mask that you put on and put off.
Hmm.
You talk about that. That is it Seth Godin, right?
Yeah.
He was like, when your live story matches the story you are telling, right? When you go home at night and you know that the person that you were throughout the day is who you are in real life. I think the online stuff, it provides people an opportunity to create some persona that's not authentic to them,
Hmm.
and they create something that they're not, and that just has to kind of eat them away, whether or not they know it or not. Being inauthentic and the lived life with the perceived life versus who you actually are doesn't match. I think that's what leads to a lot of issues now. And then kids are on this stuff earlier than usual. And I think down the line here, you stay in your line of work for the next 10, 20, 30 years, there's going to be stuff that we can't even imagine going on with how people feel about themselves and, what they value. Um,
Yeah.
so that's not really,
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. The role that social media has had, and I mean, I'm glad you brought up the Seth Godin thing, because and he's looking at this question of like branding and platforming, and whether you're an individual or you're a business or you're a church or whatever it is, there's such an emphasis on um, people's perception of you, and how can you sort of manipulate the perception that others have of you. And social media has made that, the that is the game, on social media. uh
it's literally it. I mean, it's frustrating on my end. You see fitness stuff out there and it's like, you know, kids don't even know how to do a basic exercise with a barbell. But then they see like, the crazy cool looking stuff online. It's like we're missing the point, we're missing the basics, we're missing the foundation, we're missing the stuff that actually matters. That I guess it's like even like what your mental views are. It's like you need to have a strong foundation, I feel like, in everything before you can start building on top of that with uh I don't know, different things. But anyway, you know, gym stuff's crazy. Nobody wants to do the basic boring stuff that matters. Everybody kind of wants to do the flashy cool stuff, right?
well, right.
But it's the basic boring
That's how
stuff.
you go viral, right? You
Yeah,
go
yeah.
viral doing the cool stuff, not
Yeah,
doing push-ups. Yeah.
nobody wants to see somebody, doing, four exercises in 30 minutes and going home. They want to see standing on one leg on a ball, doing a backflip or something like that. But
Yeah.
anyway, they want to see the flashy stuff. They put out there, just people in general. It's like the lived life doesn't involve, going on all these fancy vacations and taking pictures at all the coffee shops and all that other stuff, right? 99.9% of the time, that's not what they're doing, but that's not what people see. They only see the flashy stuff. They only see the good stuff. Then you start comparing yourself to what you see on the internet, and you realize your life's lame compared to that.
Hmm.
And it's just a facade, I guess. It's not even all, it's not real. But I know people don't feel that way. You see other people living a certain way, and you don't know what they're going through in their personal life. You only see the good. Nobody's putting, you know, the fights, the crying, the sadness. Nobody's putting that stuff online, because that, I guess, doesn't sell as much. But yeah, I don't know what to make of it all right now in terms of the social media and all that. It's, I think, putting some kids in some tough spots. I think it's putting adults in tough spots, and I don't know what the next step is.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right, and I think it's still one of those things that, it's been around for a little while, but I think it's still so new that we're not seeing the full, lasting impact.
Yeah,
I think we're starting to see, the a bit of the correlation between, the depression and stuff like that, and social media, and how those two can connect to each other. But I don't think we're seeing the fullness of it yet. I think it's, especially in kids, like you said, where it's now this generation who's on social media at, before they're even teenagers. Like, how is that shaping their, self-esteem and their perceptions of reality
yeah.
even? And that's, I think it's going to take some time before we even see what that leads to.
I Yes, I mean, I think what you're exposed to matters, right? So you talk about that third place providing something good and positive, right? But it could also provide the negative. One podcast I had, a kid's playing these video games. He's 8. I never met him before. He's like, "Oh, I just want to see what it's like to kill somebody." And I'm like, "Wait," I was like, "Why do you want to do that?" And he was just like, "Well, it's just a game." And I'm like, "I guess, but I mean, it just didn't make sense to me." And we talked about in the last episode, there's a kid that we knew that wrestled in the same town that we did probably a decade, that recently lost his life to
Mm,
something. And it's like, people, that's so common in our town that we grew up in. A lot of
mhm,
people just don't feel that. I don't know what it is. They don't feel, they're not feeling something. They're missing out on something. And I think a lot of times they just need more time, I feel like, to kind of work this out. And I think when we talked about AA and we talked about the church, it's like everybody can be redeemed in time, but some people aren't given enough time.
mm.
Something takes them away before they're able to figure it out. So I think that belief is pretty important, which doesn't tie into social media at all. I just was kind of connecting some dots with some things that happened recently. But when you look at something like your church and what you do now, it's a Christian church, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How do you define Christianity?
Well, I mean, it's just, the way that I look at it is, it is the promise of redemption, the promise of new life, and that hope for transformation, both in the lived experience of what life is like today, and the power of being able to transform even the communities and societies that we're a part of, because of who God was revealed to be in Jesus. I think, the message of Christ is a a hope in the power of grace and forgiveness, and the goodness that can occur, when that kind of grace and forgiveness is set loose in our lives and in our world. It's I think it's one of those things that, God is at work always in our world, and God intends for, um, for goodness, for peace, and for justice. And I think as we root ourselves in that same story of what God is doing, in that story of redemption, it brings its own healing and wholeness to us as well. And so that, to me, that's the power of it, is, believing that Jesus is the best evidence of who God is, and trying to, as best as I can, and to inspire other people as well, to try to live as much as we can the way that Jesus taught us to.
Now, what have you ever thought about, like, what made that one man's story? Like, I'm sure there was other people that tried to attempt to do what Jesus was doing during his time,
Mm.
probably potentially in the same area, literally at the same time. What do you think made his story? Like, we talked about story, right? You want to create
Yeah,
stories that last, they could resonate.
yeah.
Have you ever thought about that? Like, how did this one man do it?
I mean, for me, and this is one of those things that, clergy and different, religious scholars and stuff will debate. But for me, it comes down to, you know, I think once you are raised from the dead, it becomes harder to argue with you. um, and to me, I think I put a lot of stock in the fact that Jesus really did rise from the dead. And I think that's the pivotal point at which people realize, oh, this guy was different. I think you're right that there were other people who might have tried to teach some of the same things, or who tried to inspire people in the same way. We know that there were other people who tried to fight back against the Roman colonialism and different things like that. We know that happened, lots of times, but none of those other guys came back from the dead once they got executed. And I think Jesus's followers, that's the piece of it that had this lasting impact, because so many of the stories, I mean, all of the Gospels build to, and then he came back, and that changed everything. And I think so. I think that really is that transformational point. He came back, and
All
and
right.
so
Fair
why
enough.
wouldn't
Fair
we
enough.
keep telling that story? He didn't lose. I mean, usually, you figure the story ends with you get executed, and that's the end of it. Okay, you lost, and your story disappears and fades into oblivion. But when you come back, you didn't lose. Your story lives on, and I think that's the piece of it that in his followers, um, that's the big moment, and I think that adds the legitimacy to then everything that he was teaching and everything that he was preaching and doing throughout the rest of his life.
And in terms of, I've read, when he's on the cross, right? Does it said that, was he crucified for being the king of the Jews? Is that assessment accurate? Did I read that correctly, or is that the wrong?
So
That was
so
not from your
that's
book. That was from a different book that I read. But
Yeah, no, so he's crucified because he decided to more or less tick off everybody in power. Um and the the
Rage Against
the
the
King of
Machine,
the
right?
Jews label King of the Jews label is really more of a passive aggressive dig by the Roman politician put in charge of deciding Jesus's fate, because there's some historical drama going on there with the relationship between Rome and the institutional Jewish, religion at that time. And so that's more of a dig, but he has managed to alienate the religious elite and the institutional, you know, uh, folks at that time, and he managed to offend, the Roman, imperialism as well. And so you make angry enough of the people in power, and things don't go well for you.
Yeah, I guess you'll end up on the cross,
Yeah, man.
literally. Literally.
Yeah.
Um, I was thinking too, like there's a lot of these little phrases that I don't think people associate with, like, oh, that's a heavy cross to carry or something
Mhm.
like that. That some of these things, they last. These phrases, and people know what they mean, but they might not really know the origins of it. But that that label then was just kind of a mockery as a king of the Jews. But I mean, when did when did the term like Christianity? Do you know when that term became like a used part of
Mm.
common language? Or
Right, because early on, the earliest churches in like that first generation after Jesus, um, talked about, they were followers of the way, right? The way of Christ. And they didn't really, the term Christian was not a term that they used, and certainly Jesus didn't use the term Christian because Jesus
right?
was Jewish.
Yeah,
Like, but
that's always a weird thing. That's
really,
always a weird thing to my uneducated religious mind.
yeah,
The Jewish man, being a leader of a different religious, sect
yeah,
or movement or whatever.
yeah,
So obviously, I mean, his teachings became something. They wrote about him. You wrote in your book, whoever the names on the book, it's just kind of their interpretation, their story to their audience that was listening.
yeah,
Some of these gospels, right?
yeah,
So the gospel, whoever was telling the stories, they were telling them in a way to make a connection with the crowd,
yeah,
right? Is that
exactly.
is that the understanding behind it?
Yeah, I mean that's
Um,
one of the things that people will look at the Bible and go, "Why are there four versions of the same story that differ on things?" I mean, not the four Gospels. There's parts where they flat out disagree on
yeah,
different aspects, or they tell one story and leave out another story, and then the other one includes it. And people use that's a stumbling block for folks sometimes when they read the Gospel, because they say, "Why didn't they all just get together and tell it once and tell the whole thing?" And that's but the reality of it is you have four different authors who are trying to tell this same story, to an audience in a way that audience is going to connect with it. And so some parts are relevant to that, some parts are less relevant to that, and some parts need to be emphasized. And it's yeah, I always liken it back to hearing like the Grimm's fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood, right? There's like 900 different versions of Little Red Riding Hood, depending on what region of the world you're in and what language it's being told in, and it's just it takes on different meaning depending on what is the moral you're trying to instill in
Yeah.
somebody with this story. And a lot of that same principle applies to the Gospels. It's they all have a different audience in mind, and are trying to make Jesus real for that audience, and that means honing in on different aspects of who Jesus was and what he was about.
And as we kind of move through the years here, right? I mean, those stories were told 50 years apart, 75 years apart, right? So it's not like the books were written, at the same year, right? So the
Right.
interpretations and the stories are going to change over time, I feel like, just like every other story does.
Yeah.
And as like, 1800s, I'm guessing now, when something like Charles Darwin's like, creation comes in here, I think Nietzsche wrote this. I'm only repeating what somebody else said. He wrote like that God is dead and that we're all kind
Hmm.
of complicit in that, in the sense that it's not that I guess that the foundations, the stories that took thousands of years, the lessons, the hard, just I guess the foundational thought process that the church and religious created was almost thrown out the window for some people when Darwin says that God didn't create all humanity. I guess Nietzsche might have thought that that could have led to some people saying that God no longer exists and that that is going to be a problem for civilization because they're going to lose that framework. Um, I'm only throwing a couple random ideas out at you to see if you got any kind of feedback on this because I'm trying to put this thought together myself and trying to work out, the role of creation, the role of Charles Darwin, and did that really affect? Do you think believers at the time, you know,
I
that
I mean, I
like
think
that
it did. I think it did for folks because it honestly depends on, and this is one of the reasons that I talk about the storiedness of Scripture, um, because I think one of the other things that trip folks up is when they expect the Bible to be a science textbook, or they expect the Bible to be a history textbook, or they expect the Bible to be an instruction manual, or whatever, all the different terms that sort of people, when you read the Bible through that lens, you're reading it in as a genre or as a kind of writing that it really never was. It was always this collection, an ongoing collection of stories, of people trying to make sense of their world and their life in relationship to God. And they're living and they're writing at different times in history and different situations and different contexts and different places and all of that. And I think where Darwin was offering a different story of creation, an alternative story of creation that obviously contradicted anybody who was reading,
thousands
anybody
thousands
who
of
was
years
yeah, anybody who
of
was
story.
who had been reading that story of creation itself as a literal historical and scientific explanation of the world. um, then yeah, Darwin said nope, that's not right. But what's interesting is that approach to creation itself, or at least the creation narrative in Scripture, is in terms of how long Genesis has been written to how long people have been reading it as this is literally how it happened, is a fairly recent development in itself. The earliest readers of Genesis wouldn't have read that as, oh, this is exactly how it happened. They would have read it as poetry and as a story.
Story, like all the
Anyhow,
other great stories,
yeah,
from the
yeah,
Romans to the Greek stories that last time, right? I mean,
yeah.
um, and then in
I
your
think,
mind,
I go back to, and I think this is one of the things that Nietzsche's getting at too is, the Enlightenment wreaked havoc on a lot of the way that we learn and try to make sense of the world. because we started to deal a lot more in sort of the absolutes, and this idea of we can figure things out with certainty and sort of pin down exactly, the truth. We can pin down the truth exactly, um, and I think that's a lot of when Nietzsche is talking about God is dead, and this sense of, you know what the church and what Christianity has became so much more about um the ritual rather than a sense of truth.
Well,
Um
that's, I mean, is that not like Martin Luther's thing? Like he started seeing things at the church that he didn't agree with. They lost, you know, what they lost their, I guess they got a little shady, maybe a little crooked here or there. He started seeing some things that he didn't like, so he decided that to speak out against something like that. And are you saying like maybe people started thinking differently? The church started providing something that it didn't initially set out to be. They started changing their values system or something like that, or like I'm trying to understand that side of it at all. And even if that is a apt comparison, they became something that they didn't set out to be, or
well, I mean, I think the way what I'll always tell people is religion is a tool, right? Religion's a tool in the sense of it. To me, religion is a neutral in terms of its sort of moral value. It comes down to how it's being used. Religion as a positive is obviously something where the practice of it draws you into a closer relationship with God and with others. That is the best case, best use of religion as a tool is in helping to form those deeper relationships, and create positive transformation in life and in society. But religion can be used as a negative tool as well, and I think we've seen that over history. The power of religion to control, the power of religion in the hands of folks who are greedy, to sucker people into giving them money, to the power of religion to be able to deceive folks. And so I think it's to me, the value of religion, the goodness of religion comes down to how it's being used. And it's unfortunate that there's been, however many instances there's been of Christianity being used in such a toxic way,
yeah. Well,
throughout the
even other
course of
stuff like
history.
there's
And
these stores.
I don't think that reflects on the value of the message of Christ. I think the value of the message of Christ it is good news. It doesn't stop being good news.
Yeah,
But I think the religion of Christianity has too often been used in a negative way, and that sours it for a lot of folks.
yeah. Just kind of devalues it too a little bit,
Yeah.
and. But it's not just that. It's not just that religion. It, the Mormons had their issues with that. Did you read Under the Banner of Heaven by any chance by John
No, I haven't.
Krakauer? So I mean, it's that FODS scandal that happened in the early
Okay.
2000s with the child brides. It's Warren Jeffs, Rulon Jeffs, plural wives. But they literally were reading the book at what it was, and the fundament they were there was no deviation. I think in the Middle East there's some of that fundamentalism,
Mm.
that shows up where they're reading it literally and they're applying it that way. There's no gray area. It's like black or white. Um, so yeah, I think it's maybe belief systems in general. It's not just a problem with Christianity or anything like that. I just think it happens sometimes and it gets in the wrong hands, like you said. And you got these different con artists, these cults, these
Mhm.
fundamentalist sects that just, I guess, sour the grape, so to speak.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think that's one of the reasons that I point back to sort of that the what story allows us to do is to deal in the tension rather than needing everything to be black and white. um, because the value of a great story is that it points you to truths without having to pin them down. It allows you to sort of make your own meaning, make your own sense, and draw out of it what is relevant to your life and your experience.
yeah,
And I think that's the value of coming to Scripture with that sense of story is you don't have to answer. It doesn't have to answer every question. it can help point you along the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and as much as we've lost the ability to look at faith and look at scripture that way, I think we've done a disservice, because I think it loses some of its power and impact that it can have.
And I mean, going to another quote from your book from Annette Simmons, I think, fear is easier to activate than hope. It's like
Mm.
those negative stories are easier to get people to feel those emotions, like you look at the news, you put the news
Oh
on
yeah.
now and it's just crisis after crisis after crisis. And why is it that way? Because that's just what gets ratings for some odd reason. And I feel like people will remember the negative things behind, uh, whether it's a story on the church or a political leader or whatever. But that's a whole nother subject. That's probably another third place. These online political
Oh yeah.
political groups. But anyway, fear is easier to activate than hope. And I think those negative stories are the ones that seem to resonate more for some reason in modern times. I don't know if it was always that way, but um, that's something when I read that in your book, I was like, well, that makes perfect sense to what's going on right now, and the probably primarily political climate, I
Oh
think,
yeah.
and stuff like that, where just fear mongering and getting people fired up over stuff. But um, and it's easy to be negative too, and I think what you spoke about with people could come into your church and feel comfortable and feel open and understand that I'm not better than you because I come to church, or somebody shares that, or somebody comes in and they might have just got arrested, or they just got in trouble, lost their job because they did whatever. Instead of judging that person, hear them out,
Hmm.
understand that you know they could be redeemed. You got to hear their story and don't feel like you're better than somebody. Don't put yourself on one side, other people on the other side. I think that goes on in the political world, and they don't hear. They end up leaving out the people's voices that I think need to be heard the
Mm.
most. They feel that they're coming from a certain spot, and then they won't listen to somebody that they deem, they don't care enough maybe to hear that story about those people that they deem as lesser or
Yeah.
not them.
Well,
It's
and I
it's
think, you talked earlier about, the sense of in sports, and that sense of team, and I think that's one of the powers of sports is, um is it's a great equalizer. You put on that uniform, right? You put on that same uniform as everybody else on the team, and all of a sudden, it doesn't matter, what your home life is like. It doesn't matter, if you have money or if you're coming from, from poverty. It doesn't matter, what kind of kid you are, or who you are. You're now on this team, and that's all that matters. And you're all, now you're all equal. And I think there's a power in that. I think of some of the kids that we played with coming up, and and everybody came from different walks of life.
yeah.
And I think, and yet, that didn't matter, and stepped out on the field. Um, at that point, it's we're all in it together. And I
Yeah.
think there's a sense in which that's what the church ought to be. That's what it ought to be, to be a community of faith. Is this is what equalizes us, and that's scriptural. Like, yeah, there's a line in Galatians, where Paul talks about how when we're gathered, when we're together as Christians, it means there is no longer such a thing as a slave or a free person, or rich or poor, or Gentile or Jew, or like none of that stuff matters anymore, because we are one in what we believe.
Yeah.
um, and that's what it ought to be. Is that kind of, evening of whatever status we bring in with us.
And I wanted to bring up, you talked about the sport thing, and before we came on, it's like, hey, I want to see how this applies. You want to know how this stuff in your book applies to what I do, and I've kind of been on a personal crusade lately because there's some sport teams that are cutting kids,
Mhm.
like they're not even going to have a JV, so they're just going varsity only, and they're cutting freshmen. And I'm like, it's not just about having a freaking winning record,
Mhm.
It's like team sports provide that. They provide that there's a greater good. Some kids that I know, they play sport for 4 years, never got on the field, but they got lifelong friends from it. They learn those lessons, the value of being on a team and playing a certain role, whether or not they're on the scout team and giving the starters a good look, or just being a good workout partner for somebody, say in the wrestling room. It's
Yeah.
like everybody has a role, everybody has a value. And you don't think you're better than somebody. You hear people out. It's like you were talking about what makes there's people that probably will hear you say like, "Hey, Jesus rose from the dead," right? People you have two ways of doing it. You could either start to judge that individual, like say if you're some science-based guy that doesn't want to value that person's opinion, or you could just take that person's opinion for what it is. Everybody's different. Everybody's going to have different viewpoints. You can't treat somebody a certain way because, like, get to know the person. Don't
Yeah.
define your relationship with them based off of one certain viewpoint. Like, don't don't not associate for somebody because they're against a certain political thing, right? It's like, you know, you knew somebody for 20 years, and you're going to let one small opinion affect those 20 years of a relationship you had. It's like it doesn't make sense to my mind that things get to that point and they seem to be more present now. But yeah, it's like I guess judge the individual for who they are, basically. Not some preconceived notion or whether or not you agree with everything that they have to say. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that one. My mind just kind of went went on. I had two things going there. One, the value of sports and being a part of something, and then also treating everybody, fairly. And
Yeah.
this is, I don't know if you know the Bible verse. I don't remember it. It's like something about lest innocent blood be shed. I don't know. I'd have to. I'll look it up and send it to you. But that's the title of a book about this guy, Andre Trocmé. I think he was a Protestant in La Chambon in France during World War II. They saved thousands of children primarily, but a lot of people they would kind of bring them through. And the night that he got arrested, his wife offered dinner to those Nazi guards that arrested her husband because she viewed them as individual people.
Mm.
And Andre Trocmé, his wife, and all these other people associated there, they believed that everybody could be reformed. They believed in being honest. If a Nazi guard asked them if they were doing what they were doing, they would have said yes because they knew that the truth mattered more than
Mm.
being dishonest, and being who they were. I guess their lived life matched their perceived life. They were who they were. It was a story that kind of changed my mind. Maybe I should see if you could read that book so I could actually talk to somebody about it because it's great. Just this one guy in this little community that they started there, so it just shows the power of like
Yeah, send me the title of
I
that one.
will.
That sounds like a
It was
sounds interesting.
yeah, just small little community just that just kind of came together and worked for each other. It didn't matter what your background was, who you were, who your father was, who your husband was. They all just kind of worked together and just saved lives because they believed a human life was worth saving.
Yeah.
Every life was equal in
Yeah.
their eyes. Um, Which is great. I love it. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. I got a few things here if you're good on time. 2 more at least.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, can I go back to
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
your beef with the people cutting people from teams?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, because I think that it really is a shame because I think you're right that you know the the value of sports especially for younger kids or high school kids or whatever it is, it always goes beyond the winning and losing. It is the character building and relationship building and socialization and all of that stuff that's happening um, in in their lives that isn't even what even has nothing to do with the results on the field or wherever it is. And I think what it comes down and I think to relate it to this question of story, it's what is the story? What is the it communicates what it is about to the athletes. Um, when you're going through this process of cutting people, you are communicating that this is a story about winning. Um, and that's the message you're sending, and that's what it becomes about. And then it only is about winning then, versus sending the message of, hey, we're going to have probably more people than are going to get to play, but this isn't about this. That communicates a story too. It communicates that this is about community. This is about working together. This is about making each other better and growing and developing as people. And I think a lot of that comes down to just coaches and
Yes.
administration. It comes down to what is that coach's mindset and how do they communicate the story of what they're doing to their athletes. Because the only reason that you have a kid who's willing to stick it out for 4 years and never get on the field and never start and never get a chance and yet put in all the work and effort is because you have sold that kid on the story of what this is about. And they've determined that that's worth it. But if you can't sell them on that story, that's why you get kids that quit, or why, whatever it is, uh, is is because it takes instilling that sense of why. And I know I talked in the book about, that once the church can't answer the question of why it's doing something, then people no longer care about doing it. And it's the same thing for sports. If you can't answer the question of why this is worthwhile, then you're gonna lose kids. I think about even just my own, like, since I finished wrestling and since I finished coaching and stuff like that, just my own workout habits. And it's like, I know obviously you work out, all right? But it's like I don't. And for me it's because it's really hard to find the motivation when the why for working out was always to lose weight, to be able to make weight, or
Yeah.
to be a better wrestler. And when I no longer have to worry about my weight and no longer have to worry about wrestling, it's like, okay, so I don't have a reason why. The why was always something else, and not having a better answer to it's hard for me to be motivated enough to care about, about working out and staying in shape or any of that. And it's just, it's, you got, so having a reason that makes sense to people is important.
Yeah, that's I mean, even with my work there, I tried to instill that idea. It's like everybody wants, if a parent, wants to sign a 10 or 11 or 12-year-old kid up for something for their specific sport. And I go back to that talk about the basics and all that stuff, right? I'm like, I will never sell, athletic success as the reason that they should
Right.
be working out. You should be working out because, you're just going to be better physically. You're going to feel better about yourself, mentally, all that stuff. You get a little bit stronger, the confidence builds. I've had so many people that have like young, like middle school age daughters. They're like, dude, night and day. My daughter, the confidence level just from working out for like 6 weeks over the summer, doing like a camp, a 4-day camp. And, mom sent me a message about how much more confident her daughter feels and stuff. Cause it's like, let's try to push you a little bit further. Just one little notch.
Hmm.
Today you climbed the rope and you did like 1, 2. The next day we're going to try to do 3, like 1, 2, 3. Eventually we're going to progress this thing. And then they build confidence that way because they
Hmm.
get better. But then also they learn that things take time. You know, that rope climb might take 7 weeks.
Hmm.
If you just practice, you're going to get there. If you don't practice it, you're not going to improve. So there's some lessons like that too. So yeah, that's a big thing too, where the focus is on the outside thing, right? Not on the inside.
Hmm.
The focus is on getting better for sport, not on being a better, healthier individual. So maybe you could keep that in mind, Matt,
Hmm.
next time.
Yeah.
Next time
Yeah,
you're
no, I know. Hey, listen,
you'll
listen.
be a
I know,
better.
I
I think
know
you'll be
it's,
a
I
better
know it's an
pastor if
issue
you're
for
fit.
me.
Yeah, you'll be better. You'll be better at your job, I think, if you're a little more fit. You'll be wearing cut off shirts into the church
Yeah.
because you're that was I don't know. No, we went I wanted to ask about you know what, every room, Peter Block, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about everything mattering, really, I think, in life. You matter, the decisions you make matter. All these little decisions you make kind of build create who you become.
Hmm.
Peter Block here. Every room we occupy serves as a medical metaphor for the larger community that we want to create. There's those guys that are like, make your bed in the morning, clean your
Hmm.
room. Uh, the chaos that your car is, which is my car, it's a mess. Like that's what my life is like too. So if you start cleaning up some of these little things, those areas can potentially, I guess, compound or build, and it becomes a habit that might wear off in other areas too, right? I mean, is that something that you Oh, I guess with that too, it's like clean up yourself first before you start trying to clean up others was also a thought that I had when I read
Mm.
that. It's like if you're living in chaos, let's get your chaos in order, before you start trying to fix chaos in other people, in other people's lives. I think that kind of goes with that judgment thing too. And, the black or whiteness behind most decisions or views, I feel like. Um, so that's not really a question other than the fact of, is there certain things in your life, if you talk to somebody and they're like struggling in one area, has there been times, has there been examples when you're like, hey, let's just get this little small thing in order first and then, go from there.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting to me, um, your interpretation of that line. from block, because what's funny is in the context that he's writing that, he's actually talking literally about, the spaces and the way that we organize the rooms that we're in and how they communicate our sense of welcome and hospitality and stuff to people. Like the best example of that I always think of is the difference between, a lot of our churches and the contrast that they have to a Quaker meeting house, right? So most churches are organized where the pastor stands up front, everybody sits facing the pastor,
Yeah.
right? And sort of how that communicates a sense of hierarchy and authority, because everybody else is there, and that person is up front, versus a Quaker meeting house where where it's organized in a circle or a square and everybody sits facing each other, and there is no person who stands in the middle, because nobody has that central authority. In the middle is usually the altar or whatever, but the community all sits facing each other, and how that is communicates a whole different thing about the orientation of that community and who is important, who matters, and different things like that. And so Block is, what's funny is Block is sort of talking about that mindset of paying attention to how you create spaces, and how that in a sense communicates what matters, what values you put on people's belonging. But I think your reading of it, in terms of sort of your personal space, I think I think that tracks. I think that makes sense too. And especially when you were talking about, that in a sense, we all have messy rooms. And I think for a lot of folks, you're right. It's, if you look at it just from the broadest sense of it and you say, wow, look at the size of this mess, it can be overwhelming, and you get to that sense of despair, like, I'm never going to clean up this whole mess, there's just too much of it. And yet sometimes it just means starting in one spot in one corner
Yeah.
and cleaning up one piece of the mess at a time. Or you hire Mary Poppins and you start, snapping your fingers and stuff, and then it's all good. It just, magically.
That's like the comparison too of like, this is like the problems in your life, right? But you can't just tackle this huge thing
Yeah.
at once. Like you have, like you said, start with that corner, start with that one section of the room, clean under the bed, clean off your dresser, whatever it may be. And then from there you just keep moving, keep going forward. But I think too, like the way that I interpreted that too, I think you said everybody has messy rooms, right? Totally agree. Now, if you looked at the messiness of your house, like try to think about when your house is at its messiest. It's like what's going on in your personal life.
Mhm.
There might be some messiness in your own personal life that you're just cleaning the house off, or you're just not caring about it as much too. So that's kind of where I was thinking with it too. It's when things are messy in your personal space, they might also be messy in your personal life. And if you could just tackle one of those like corner pieces, like you said, you might be able to start cleaning up your life a little bit too, little by little.
Mhm.
But then the other thing too, before we kind of finish this up, we've been on here for a while. I told you only an hour, but I think we went over that for
Good.
for
It's been a
10 or
good it's
15
been
minutes.
a good conversation.
All right. The story you wrote in here, the story's already there. You just need to draw the story out for it to be useful. So when I read that, there's this guy, Stephen Pressfield. He's a great author. He wrote this book, Gates of Fire, about that the Battle of Thermopylae, that there's a
Okay.
story of 300.
Yep.
But he also has this book called the War of Art, which is about creating art, whatever your art may be. It's like overcoming the resistance. Every time that he sits down and writes, he says a prayer to the muse. So he
Mhm.
has one of these prayers from one of these ancient times. He has a bunch of books that are awesome about historical fiction from like that Roman period. This other one's like Virtues of War, I think, that was just great. Anyways, an awesome writer. So he'll say this little prayer to the muse because he believes that if he does that, if he respects the muse will respect him back. If he honors the muse will honor him with insights that he has within himself. So I thought about that, and I also thought we said about Stephen King. It's like when you're out there looking for something, like look inward. It's in there.
Mhm.
Like the muse in Pressfield's world was like it's going to come out. It'll bring it out of me. It'll draw it out. When you have these ideas that come out of nowhere, you're like, did they really come out of nowhere, or are they just in there and they needed
Right.
an activity, or not an activity, an action to bring them out. And the Stephen King thing is good too because it's like it's there. You just have to look deep enough, I guess, right? Don't be the answers are probably in the deepest, darkest area sometimes when you're trying to, I guess, draw out a story that you need to improve upon or something like that, right? I mean, when you say to draw the story out for it to be useful, are you talking about like honest self-assessment type stuff, like and ways to improve yourself?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that that's getting at. I mean, it's just one of the things that when I tell people, that we connect to other people through our stories, and one of the pushbacks that I always get is, well, my life is not that exciting. I don't really have a story that's nothing special or nothing crazy has ever happened to me, and it's like that's not what just your story necessarily needs to be. Like, what are the moments in your life that have made you the person that you are? And it doesn't have to be some crazy singular event. Like sometimes it's just the habitual thing that you did with your dad every once a week growing up, and it's like the repetition of that is what built your relationship with your dad or whatever. Like those, that's a story in itself, because maybe that helps shape you into the kind of father you are or something. It's to me it's helping people understand that your story doesn't have to be some singular thing. It can be the pattern of events, the pattern of things that have made you into who you are. um, and I think what's powerful is when people who come from very different walks of life, who have very different lived experiences, can tell a story and hear in somebody else's story something that resonates with them, with themselves. um, we grew up in two very different ways, but yet we came to the same realization about the value of family or something like that. And that connects, that's what connects people to one another.
And like that,
And
you have that Richard Rohr quote too, where even on the negative side of things, where
yeah,
communion and dear compassion is found much more by shared pain than by shared pleasure. That shared activity, good, bad, whatever it may be. It's like you can
yeah,
find common ground with somebody if you look deep enough and you're open enough, right? Sorry, I didn't mean
yeah.
to cut you off there, but
Yeah,
I
no,
was just looking
but
at that
you're right.
quote.
Yeah, that works in, yeah, it works in two different ways. It works, shared trauma or shared glory, or whatever it is. Both of those can bring people together in a similar way, as people resonate with the experiences of others. And I think that's so for me when I talk about people, finding and being willing to tell and to share their stories, it's with that goal of empathy, and being able to build that empathy and build those relationships with other people.
And have you applied some of this stuff present day
Yeah.
since you wrote the book? I mean, have you seen some good success with like uh, taking some of those ideas of like I don't know if you did this in your church with like you have in your book like, hey, I'm a sinner, opening up a discussion with that, and then having people share their stories. Is that
I've done some of that, not in as broad a context as a Sunday morning, like I sort of suggest. I mean, that's a tongue in cheek suggestion in the book, just knowing
right?
that
Yeah, yeah, I know, but
99.9% of congregations would be terrified if somebody if we tried to do something like that. But just, I mean, in smaller group settings,
yeah,
we've done some sharing and some self reflection and stuff like that, and talking to others about what one of the ones I've used is, what made you fall in love with the church? Why do you care about the church? What impact has the church made in your life? And just having people think back to, why does this matter to me? Because sometimes it's helpful to remind them when they're feeling overwhelmed by, there's so much to do, and it's so monotonous, or it's so frustrating, or whatever it is. It's good for people to connect with. Wait, why do I care about this again? Oh, that's right,
yeah.
because once upon a time it made this huge difference in who I am. And to remind them of that sort of re-engages and energizes why they care. And so that's, I've done it in that. And then just this past winter, was it winter? When was it? No, it was or in the spring here. We just did a few weeks of sort of that storytelling competition, that I sort of note in the book as well, of a sort of a moth style, having people tell stories related to different prompts, and giving away some prizes and stuff like that. But it was really interesting to see the diversity of folks who, participated and had stories to tell, and the different things that they came up with, in their own from their own lives. And that was another one of those things where, just seeing different age groups and different generations of people connect to each other through, the power of experience and the stories of that.
So we're talking about, I mean, if we were to wrap up just some of the stuff that you brought up, obviously we talked about the power of story, people being open in an effort to heal, being totally just honest about what's going on in your life, and maybe finding a community or group that will hear you on it and not, judge you, make you feel like you're a part of them. You talked about grace earlier, grace, forgiveness, redemption. Those are three things you brought up with Christianity. Um, I mean, how would you define grace?
Grace is the unconditional acceptance and love, for others. It goes beyond what you might deserve, or what you might think you deserve, or what think you might earn, or what you have done. It is that unconditional affirmation that you matter. Your life has has worth and value, and your past does not define you, or at least does not
Yeah,
determine what your future might be.
that's a good
um,
one. I
and
feel
and
like
I
that.
think, to me that's what grace is about. Is there's always hope, there's always the potential for change, and the potential for goodness, no matter how bad things have been.
So you're not who you were at your worst moments. That's not who you are.
Exactly.
Like that idea.
Yeah.
Grace goes towards, love of others and also love of yourself.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And forgiveness of others and forgiving yourself. Same idea, right?
Yeah, I mean, and what I have found is, most people are good at one or the other. There's a lot of people who
Yeah.
who are great with, giving others the benefit of the doubt and being really nice to everybody, no matter who they are, but have a lot of trouble, forgiving their own mistakes.
Yeah.
And then other people who are great. They can do no wrong in their own eyes, right? Real great at forgiving themselves, and yet really judging of others. And it's like, wait, if you can, cling to grace for yourself, why can't you extend that same grace to others? And try to respect them and sympathize and empathize with what they might be going through. Yeah.
All right. Now, before we kind of wrap this thing up, is there anything I probably didn't discuss how any of this applies to what I do, only a little bit, but is there anything you wanted to to ask or share
No,
about
I
kind
mean,
of getting together?
I think the what you said about, you know reminding people of the what for, and relating it to sort of the internal growth, and longer lasting growth, I think is really important. And to me, that's what all of sort of it's the process, it's the journey, it's not necessarily the destination. um,
Yeah.
and to me, that's what the walk of faith is about too. It's not about getting your ticket to heaven. It's about how is this shaping me as a human being while I'm still alive, uh, and making me a better person to, for myself and to those around me. Because if it's not making any difference, then what is the point? If it's not, changing the kind of person that you
Yeah.
are.
You're just a
Um,
speck in the universe.
yeah.
What does anything matter?
Yeah, like, and so, I think that's a really important piece of it. And then, the other part of it really is just I think we need to keep building better relationships with one another. And I think what you said about, learning to treat people, or to judge people based on the kind of person they are, and not on little snippets, that you get, I think is really just an important piece of building a better society. Is being willing to talk to each other, being able to relate to one another and communicate. And I think, being able to listen to one another, without, rushing to judgment, or rushing to an argument or something like that. And I just think being able to share stories that unpack our own experiences, because I think what often gets in the way when we have, disagreements with people, is we don't take time to understand what they have experienced that has led them to believe what they do. And I think there's always a story behind that.
Yeah.
There's always a story behind, this. I've run into this. I had two Vietnam War veterans who have a 180-degree different take on our current political situation. It's like, how did two people who had a similar experience, or at least have been through something similar, come to two radically different conclusions? And it's like, because it's how they've processed it, it's how they experienced that time and what they've experienced since then. And it's like, but they don't have to be, enemies. They don't have to hate one another, because there's so much more that they share than their current, than their current views. And there's so much more that connects them than divides them. And I think, being able to hear each other's stories is what gives us that opportunity to build empathy and be able to relate to one another in spite of the ways we might disagree. And
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, that's as a pastor, as a person, that's what I'm always trying to do, is to build those kind of relationships and build those kind of communities where, it's going to make us more sympathetic and more gracious to one another. Because I mean, that's, to me, that's the key to trying to build a better world.
That might be the best spot to stop there, man. You just summed that up nicely. All right, Matt, thanks for coming on, man. It was good talking to you. I
Yeah,
have,
you too, man. I
one
appreciate it.
thing that I feel like comes out of these conversations, right? It's like, you sit by and keep, like today, I never really realized that the sports, fitness, little, whatever I'm trying to do is almost to create that third place for a kid,
Absolutely.
to build confidence, meet people, and work towards something, and grow, and develop and understand that things aren't going to come easy, but others are going through the same stuff. Just keep working, whatever, it's going to take time, all of that, right? I didn't real like, if we didn't have this conversation, I probably wouldn't have put that piece together. Now it's got me thinking more about, digging in a Ray. Is that a book from Oldenburg?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got it up on my shelf here somewhere, or it
It's all,
might be on my home bookshelf.
but I
It's called The
mean,
Great Good Place.
so now I'm thinking to myself, there's probably ways. Well, just think about my own line of work here, and remember that maybe this is the third place for a lot of kids,
Oh yeah. Oh, I
so
think it
provide.
absolutely is. It's the place where it's not school, it's not the expectations
Yeah.
of school, and it's not home where you got, who knows what home life is like, but it's a chance to be among their peers. It's a chance to do something fun. It's a chance to, to not, hopefully not have the same kind of pressure that they
Yeah.
might have in those other two spaces.
That's exactly right. There's try to eliminate. I think that's a problem with young kids too. It's that there's always adults interjecting, whether it's a coach, a parent, a teacher. The kids just lose the ability to explore, and have some freedom
Mhm.
from. So I try to do that in the gym too, and try to just provide a positive place for them, and let them explore, and let them learn, how to progress things. Hey, you missed it. Why did I miss it? It's like, I don't know. It's just not your day today. Let's figure out. Maybe you didn't sleep well. Maybe you ate like crap. Maybe you didn't warm up enough for that challenging set that stuff like that. So it's like trying to give them a place to navigate and to learn and all that stuff,
Mhm.
without somebody just always telling them um, how they should be feeling and what they should be doing and all that. Just trying to give the kids a good third place, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great takeaway.
Yeah. All right, man. It's good talking to you. Maybe we'll do this again. How about you read one? I'll read one of your books. I might read The Plague by Camus, because that's not the first time I heard of it. I was just reading something recently, and I'm like, all right, maybe I should. That guy probably has some other. He has some other stuff. I don't remember if it was The Plague that was referenced, but when I saw you reference him, I was like, I just read a book that they were talking about something from him. But
Probably his. Yeah. I mean, the other one was The Stranger is his other big
all
one.
right,
Big French existentialist.
and
Um,
then I'll send you that Lest Innocent Blood Be Shed. It's a great book. Philip
yeah.
Bailey,
Yeah.
this
No,
guy. It's
that's
about,
yeah. That sounds fascinating.
yeah. All right, man. It's good talking to you, Matt.
You
We'll
too,
do this
Chris.
again. See you, dude.
Yep. Yep. Take it easy.